So welcome once again to Gavin, Patton Films, and I'm Seamus Breslin from Friends at Derry City Cemetery. And I know several films we already have online on YouTube have been very popular. People are requesting more. So we're down today. We're going to have a wee look at the waterfront, the quayside in Derry, tell you some stories about all what went on. It's an ever-evolving waterfront, as you can see now. It's totally different to what it was even when I was growing up. And so hopefully we can entertain you with a few stories as we go along about the tragedies, the tales, murders, industry, the hard-working dockers, our links to America and the world, even to the Great Hunger, the famine, and the SS Londonderry, a huge tragedy here in a ship when over 100 people, women and children, died on board, etc. And so if you thought to follow us, we'll tell the tales and walk and talk as we go along. So across from us is our last remaining railway station with our one railway line to Belfast. But back in the day, this was a hugely important railway junction, hugely strategic in the whole infrastructure of transport in Ireland. Up here with the railway here that took you to Dublin. Over here with the one that took you up to Strabane. Down here with the railway that served the quayside. And it also went down there into Donegal. And when it's down on the Donegal, then it junctioned off up on the Shown. Now I went down to Letterkenny. So with huge migration, huge transport links where the livestock and all the products were coming from all around the world via Dublin or via this quayside, the city. And actually, Gavin Bridge here that has two decks. The bottom deck was purposely designed for railways only, and it actually was only converted from a railway underdeck to car transport in 1964, the year I was born. So it's in recent times. So we're now at the bottom of John Street and the bottom of Bridge Street. Now, Bridge Street looks pretty innocent now, but back in the day, Bridge Street and Sugar House Lane over here and Foyle Street in general was a pretty rough, tough area along the dockside. And Bridge Street in particular, Fissin the Fountain, and Bridge Street was a staunch nationalist area, Fissin the Fountain. And so basically up here at Bridge Street and the Fountain in the 1920s and before that was possibly akin to the Falls Road and the Shankill Road. It was Derry's interface. Hard to believe now when you get up on it, so peaceful. In fact, one of the most brutal killings in the 1920s, and 40 people died during the Civil War, managed Civil War, sectarian conflict here, was a man called Dobbins, and he actually threw on the river here at the railway station. He was a Protestant, and the Catholics, nationalists threw him in, and when men tried to go and save him, they fired shots and says, "Get away, leave him to die." But this man then says, "Go F yourself," and he dived on him, went out and went to Dobbins and got him. And Dobbins, as is reported at the inquest, said, "I'm a Protestant," and the man that dived in to get him says, "I don't care what you are, you're a human being." And he got him and brought him in, and then he was taken, but sadly he died. He's buried out in Glendermot. So it's just one, and this the railway station up here, right up to the 1950s. The IRA crashed a train in there during the border campaign under that railway station, and in the 1920s up there, that would have been the direct link to Dublin. So there was a lot of robberies, and there was a lot of politics went on at the railway station, and burnings, and the transport workers would have went on strike and refused to carry troop trains and that during the War on Independence, 1919 to 21. And so there was lots happening. You can only imagine the sounds and the noises and all that around here as regards to the railway. So this here was a wooden wharf, and along here would have been all different types of industries. You had the butter markets, kettle markets, and you had coal yards, because coal was a huge thing. If you look at even the houses now in Clarendon Street and Great James's Street, I can actually see the factory up here, and it must have about 40 chimney pots. So coal was the source of heat, and there was a lot of ships coming in with coal. So it's hard to imagine, but all along here was the wharf, and it wasn't just called the quay. It had different names. You had King's Quay, Queen's Quay, you had Princess Quay, and it was a hive of activity, and you had all these different hand cranked cranes for bringing stuff off, and then there was a toll on the bridge, so it was handier sometimes just to take the ferry. So you had boatmen here, and one of the boatmen here was called Hugh McGee, and Hugh McGee died in 1902 on Christmas Eve. Just as he was packing up his boat, he fell in and he drowned it. And what's remarkable about Hugh McGee's story is, just here where it happened, is the man had actually got certificates from the Royal Humane Society for diving in that water and saving 15 people, and there himself on Christmas Eve, it wasn't to be. There was nobody there for him, and he died. So there's a rumour, or there's a myth, or whatever, an urban legend that the River Foyle is supposed to claim so many lives per year. So the links to here in America and the rest of the world are enormous, unbelievable. Like, we all think of hopping on jet planes now. Derry was the Shannon Airport, the Heathrow Airport of its day, the place where you had the departures, and if you couldn't afford even to get to America or Canada, and you had just enough money, you might have made it to Liverpool and then hoped to get a job there and maybe then move on. A lot of the immigration was actually where you would save up in the family, because it cost money, and these ships leaving here, the McCorkles and the Cooks, were some of the finest ships in the world. The Minnehaha from Derry was actually stopped. People at work coming up to Hudson in New York, and they'd say, there's the green yacht from Derry. So anybody tells you there's nonsense about coffin ships leaving Derry, they've been very disrespectful to the people and the mariners of Derry and the ship owners and that. But you had to pay top dollar. So what you'd have done is you would have paid, saved up your family, and you'd have sent the strongest son and maybe the smartest daughter over to America, Australia, or whatever, even England, Scotland. And then you would hope that they would do well. And what they do then is that they would return the money and prepay the passage for your brothers, your sisters, and maybe even your mothers and fathers to come along. So there was a structure to it. Brings us here to our first information board along the quay. And it's detailing the huge, enormous role that Derry played in the Battle of the Atlantic in World War II. Over here was the barracks. It was called HMS Ferret, and at one time there was 20,000, imagine that, young, fit, healthy servicemen here, and yet all them women from the shirt factories. And my father used to say about the Third World War, and I says, there was no Third World War. He says, son, you had the First World War, the Second World War, and he says every Friday and Saturday night up the town, when all them sailors, the Americans and the Marines, and they're all money and they all got these, it was like the movies, Hollywood had come to Derry. He says, and the locals were getting their eyes wiped, so there was murder. You had these shore patrols and people getting battened down and the windows getting smashed. And you want to see the court cases, I'll tell you, some of it's X-rated. But these men brought Winston Churchill, and that says the only thing worried him during the Second World War was the Atlantic, the Battle of the Atlantic, and people say that only for the role of the city during that time, could have lost the war. Germans could have won. Just look at the bus depots behind us here, and the main, what we would know now as Foyle Street, pretty quiet, pretty respectable, but bad reputation back in the day, especially at night time, and especially when all these sailors were about and that. And I think when Derry got its first bus service, it was a huge thing at the time, an omnibus. And if I remember correctly, the first bus route in Derry was, I'm talking here motorised because you also had tramways and horse-drawn trams. I think it started at Dale's Corner on the waterside, progressed through the city, and it concluded at the Rosemount factory up in Rosemount. And that was our bus. It was also a huge sensation whenever Derry got its first fire engine and fire pump, which was fueled by Thing, and it was the envy of the rest of Ireland because I think it was the first steam-powered one, and it cost a lot of money. And it was involved in a huge incident here in Foyle Street when the soldiers protected during the riots in 1920 mistook armed men over here with rifles, and they mistook them for somebody was going to attack them, nationalists or whatever, and they fired and shot and killed them, and it turned out that it was actually B specials, it was actually B men. And then our brand new fire engine that we were all so proud of, there's a great picture of it been displayed just down here at the Guildhall, and the London media even were going, look at Derry, London Derry, they've got this great fire engine. It's very progressive, forward thinking, whatever. And it didn't last very long then, for it was burnt during the riots over outside my granny's house in the Lecky Road in 1920. What's about you? That's right. So there's very little left of the old quayside and the old wooden wharf, because this was all wood the whole way down along there, and you would hear the water lapping on at it. And it was actually quite a dangerous place because you had to watch yourself, because there were no railings or guards like that there. You went over, you were scared one of your friends might give you an old heave and throw you in for a bit of fun. But you could also just blend in amongst all the activities were happening. The dockers would be standing there doing their work, and you'd be standing talking to them. You weren't locked out. Commercial buildings over here. One of the few buildings going way back then, and this was the centre of trade and industry where everything happened. And the Guildhall. All right. So they actually preserved a lot of the timbers from the wharf. They could speak what stories they would tell, but the wee plaques giving you all the information's gone. Somebody's forgot they preserve them, which is sad. But that's what the old wooden wharf was there, the whole way along there, a lot of timber. And that timber would have come in probably from Canada, and that real hardwood, because there's no point putting softwood near salt water. Over here is the site of the City Hotel. City Hotel was part of was regarded as being one of the finest hotels in Ireland. It would have been Derry's equivalent of the Shelbourne Hotel. Well, it was bombed anyway during the Troubles, the 30 years of conflict. I remember it being boarded up, and that we used to sneak in, and the ballroom, everything was left just probably for insurance purposes. But anyway, there's a Peace Park on the site, and we've got our new iconic Peace Bridge, which is, I think it's fantastic, because I've never been in St Colum's Park as often in my life since that bridge was built. It makes it so easy for the two communities and the two sides of the bridges and the two ends of the river to meet. It's actually quite pleasant to the eye too. So, Columns Park over here, ruins of the old St Brecken's Church going back to our ancient times, and over there we had the United States Naval Base right up until 1977. It used to be a great place. It was US sovereign territory, a lot of local gearers, married sailors, and once you went inside the base, everything transferred to using dollars and was all American. It was sovereign territory. behind us here, as you can see, when you had all these ships coming and all these people leaving, you had all these agents along here for people. There was actually the United States had sort of like a wee mini embassy here in Canada and that, where you could get your pre-boarded destination for going to America. There's the train pulling out from Derry City now. Anyway, over here we have the customs house. So wherever you've got people and you've got trade and industry, you've got customs. There's nothing in this life as certain as what taxes are. So the customs house was here to collect all the taxes and see who was arriving, who was departing, make sure everybody was paying their way. And it was also important because people didn't have watches and clocks in the houses back in, they know the time. So we have a clock over here in Edmonton, we have a clock up here in the Guildhall, we have a clock up here in the customs house, and we used to have a clock up here and revolving doors on a nice building up at the corner here at the bottom of Orchard Street. So with some of the most beautiful architecture in Ireland, the Guildhall and St Column's Hall, Edmonton Barracks, and then with some of the ugliest, and here's the BT building, look. And people, when they come here, visitors, I take them turn around and say it's an ugly building. I say, but you have to realise, when these buildings were built in the 1970s, a lot of the thought with the architecture was keep as minimal glass as what you can, make them as bomb-proof as what you can, because a lot of buildings didn't survive too long around here during the 1970s. This part of the quay actually holds great memories for me because this was the hive of activity. This is where it all happened. This is where the Scotch boat left, a lot of Donegal immigrants on it. You had cattle down below in steerage, and then you had the people up above getting the smells of the cattle. But it got you to Glasgow, and it got the Glasgow people here. A lot of them used to come on holidays. And then here you had cattle boats. You had the Liverpool shed, and you had all these sheds. We used to get them, we used to close the doors, and we used to have spuds, potatoes, and we used to throw them up in at the pigeons. The pigeons were there because there was lots of that grain and then meal came as feedstuff. And it all happened here. The dockers, not the dockers, but the quay workers had their own wee place over here beside cattle pens. And we used to get in and sit with them, and they let us warm ourselves at the fire. And then when it came in the time for the boat, they used to have actually their names was, their occupation were cow wallopers. So I'm saying, what's your job? Oh, I'm a cow walloper. And they would actually wallop the cows up the gangplank, and then the dung flying out and all that. So somebody then must have realised that was a bad thing doing that, because all the work then was over in England and Scotland where the cattle were going. So now we have foil meats and all, and we have all the poultry processed here, keep the jobs here, which is good. Somebody was telling me, and I never seen it myself, but the pigs and the geese and all, that they had to be walked all along here. They used to put oil and tar on their feet to make sure they didn't get damaged. But it was all live, getting exported. Another big thing was potatoes, spuds. And what happened was the cycle is, I think it still is to this day, is that you grow these spuds in Ireland, they're pretty watery and green and brown and that. But the many spuds then, the small ones are exported to places like Cyprus and Spain, where they then become the new potatoes, the new spuds that come back to us. So what goes out actually then comes back. It's sort of like the trade for the immigration. What happened was the ships would leave here and it would take people to America, take them to Philadelphia, Boston, New York, and southern states. But then there was no people to come back because Americans, the people over there weren't looking to come back here. So what they would bring back then would be cotton and timber and grain and all different stuff that you needed in Derry. It was good economics. And there's a story that with the shirt industry here in Derry and the cotton replacing linen, that the shirt factories in Derry actually made the uniforms for both the blues and the greys during the American Civil War. So there's economics for you. They were supplying the uniforms to both sides, using the cotton that actually came from there. So Ebrington Barracks over here was a hive of activity, full of soldiers and then full of sailors when it was a navy barracks and that. And as you can see, the bridge is away up there and there's toll on the bridge, and sometimes it was just handier if you had a big function on in the Guildhall here and a dance or whatever. What you would have had then, it would have stated on it that the dance ends at 11:30 in the Guildhall and the ferry leaves at 11:40 here, and you would go down and the ferry would take you straight over to Ebrington Barracks. Imagine it. Oh boy, the men were all poor here, living on the bog side and the Brandywell and up the fountain, but these soldiers and all, they're all money. It's crack. You've sort of different epochs, generations of the departures, the emigration and the trade from Derry. And the first one is sail. So you had all these sailing ships, and the sailing ships, because Derry is the nearest port to America, it was economical for to leave here. So we had the sailing period where there was dependent on the tide and the winds and that. Then you had the steam and the iron stage and that. But the ones with the sail and that were able to come right up in here to the quay and tie up here, and you went up the gangplanks. But once it became then the steam and oil and metal ships and the iron ships and the big liners, then they were too big in that for to come up the narrows of the foil. So you would have had tenders here, small paddle boats, like something you'd see in the Mississippi River, one of them called the Seymour, one of them called America, and you would board here and the tender would take you to Mayville up at the deep water, where you would then join the ships like the Cameronia. Well, these ships started in Glasgow, stopped here, picked up at Mayville, and then next stop was, say, New York. Some of my relatives left here in the 1920s, the Houstons, a brave thing. And it turns out that one of the sensible things to do, because it was an expensive business, this emigration in the 1920s, and the SS Cameronia up here, was to try and plan if your wife was pregnant for the birth to be on board the ship, because it had a surgeon and it had better medical facilities and it was part of the package. And so the Houstons done that, and one of their children was born on board. And the tradition is, if you're born on board the ship, they name the child after the ship. So one of my relatives, the Houstons, was born on board the Cameronia, so she was called Cameronia. And when we met the Houston family in recent times in New York, they thought it was funny growing up that she was in all these Irish Catholic schools and Irish Catholic institutions, and everybody was called Margaret and Mary and Bridget, and there she was called Cameronia. Her nickname was Camia. I've heard there recently of a man here called Ethiopia, and I was saying, what's a man in Derry called Ethiopia? Imagine me called Ethiopia Doherty. Well, the thing was, you were born on board the steamship Ethiopia, leaving there. So if you've got a strange name in Derry, a lot of it could be due to being born on board a vessel. There's a great cycle path along here too, and if you cycle or walk, you can right up to the Donegal border. It's actually quite a pleasant walk. And as you go out of the city, you're actually going away from the traffic fumes and that, and it's actually quite a healthy walk. Well, anyway, one of the greatest tragedies, I could tell you about drownings down here and tragedies down here, hundreds of them over the years, but I could also tell you about great acts of heroism on here, just like Hugh McGee. People without a second's notice jumping on there after people, even right up until the NATO ships were coming on here and submarines. And but one of the greatest tragedies that ever befell this city was, there was a ship called the SS Londonderry, right? and this is pretty ironic, he called it the SS Londonderry, but it was actually leaving Sligo, and it was loaded up with cattle and all the things in that, and most of the steerage passengers, the passengers being the cheapest, trying to get away as cheap as they can, I think it was going to Liverpool, hoping to get to Liverpool, and then if they didn't settle in Lancashire, get work in the mills and that, they would head on to America, leapfrog it on over. But the SS Londonderry had a storm off the coast of Donegal. And it seems then that the captain ordered that all the passengers, 100 plus women, children, men, get put under a hold. They put under a hold, and then the waves were crashing around it, and to prevent the vessel from sinking, they then ordered them to place a tarpaulin over it and seal the tarpaulin to stop the water getting in. Whenever the storm lulled a bit, they pulled the tarpaulin off, and all the people were suffocated, lying asphyxiated, with children and that, with arms round one another. And so the nearest port was Derry, and they put on here to Derry. They put on here to Derry, and they couldn't believe it. That it was something, it seems it was totally and utterly shocking what happened. And there was a whole inquiry, and they were on about manslaughter charges against the crew and against the captain and that. But one of the sidelines of the things that I thought was that they couldn't find anybody that was willing to go down and bring the bodies out. Such was the distress it would have left you and that. So they got a load of dockers and able-bodied men, and they plied them full of drink. And so they went in half-cut to bring them out. Then there was a dispute then about where they were going to be buried. This was before the city cemetery opened up in 1853. So it seems then that this is, well, the only place we can bury them, 100 plus, is over in the workhouse. The yard behind the workhouse was always used as a cemetery whenever there was nothing else available. So they were buried there in the 1980s then, when they were renovating and building houses in the land over there, and uncovered the remains of these poor human beings that were on the SS Londonderry. And I think Finbar Doherty led the campaign, and the council and whatever stepped in, and they reinterred them and had funerals for them, and they're buried now out at Ballyowen thing. I don't think the captain was ever prosecuted, but a lot of people, I had people up here from Sligo, and they had never heard it, so it's sort of become a wee bit forgotten. So if you've grain coming in here, and you've got all these exports and imports, you have to have things to facilitate them. So down along here was McCorkle's mills and all these grain mills and that. I used to actually come along here with selling me Belfast telegraphs and stop and chat to the dockers, because it wasn't a closed-in docks where you weren't allowed. It was pretty open. You walked up and down and chatted to people coming on and off the boats, and sometimes even went on, had a wee chat with the sailors and a look around. You're a young boy, you can get away with things like that. But you used to see dockers there covered in dust, and you seen them sweating and all, coming off with spuds on their back and coal and big cranes and all getting operated. It was a hive of activity, and all the smells associated and all the sounds associated with. And there was a lot of skullduggery went on too, busting open bags to get some spuds for your family, and letting things fall into the water and then coming down later to collect them, and all sorts of going on, strikes. But I must say that I have researched over years and years and years, and I say the most dangerous occupation, it was even more dangerous than joining the armed forces. It was more dangerous than being a fireman, was being a docker. There wasn't a year past where dockers were dying and falling into holes, getting hit by cranes, overcome with fumes, and they were the most generous people in the world. All you ever see is them donating money to this, donating money to that. And right up until my generation there, was always the dockers, you know, the dockers. And whenever there was political conflict or somebody was ever in need and needed help or anything, they left their work and they would march up. And if there was a protesting, maybe the police were getting out of hand, and these big strong men, dockers, would land on the scene, and it changed the whole scenario. So I don't think they get the credit they deserve. I think my father's cousin, one of the Mullers, actually died down here in the 70s when a crane fell. So down along here we also had the electric, Derry's first electric. It was a huge thing, electric, coming to Derry, because before that we all depended either on candles, paraffin oil, or the gas yard. Now the gas yard, because of the smells and that, were kept near the city for the coal supply and that, but far enough away to take the smells away, just like the city cemetery, near enough but still far away. But the electric station was here, down along here, for the obviously get the oil and the coal before that supplies just off the ship and under the electric station. So as we go down further down towards where the dry dock used to be, we'll hear that Derry had a very rich shipbuilding. And people were proud of the ships, and they were proud of the shipbuilders, and they were proud of the tradespeople. They were proud of the innovation, that they were always innovating and bringing in new types of engines, new types of propellers. Even back in the days of sail, the McCorkles and Cooks were on about having copper bottoms, and they were using the finest timbers from Canada. So I hate this nonsense of people bringing down our maritime heritage by saying that coffin ships left here and they all died and all nonsense. But anyway, the shipbuilding was a big industry, and so you needed skilled people if you were going to build ships. So they had to go over and they had to try and recruit skilled builders from Scotland, from on the Clyde in Glasgow, and entice them over here to come to our shipyard and build ships here, bring their skills with them. So whenever they come over, obviously they have to be housed somewhere. So the housing for them was up in the Scotch Quarter. Where's the Scotch Quarter? To this day, Argyle Street, Glasgow Terrace, Hawthorne Terrace, all associated with the Scottish community. So all this trade and immigration and imports and exports and industry and commerce, there was a lot of money to be made in it, and the people that were making it lived nearby too. And this was our professional quarter up here, Clarendon Street, Great James's Street, 4-storied houses, the finest of the fine. Admiral Copen, who made the finest ships, Corkman, had Copen House around here. Most people here might remember it because it was the brew that the EHSS offices. But they lived up here, and so the ship owners and that up here and up at Crawford Square, nice and handy to the quay, nice and handy where their businesses were. Some people that are on then were able to afford, just like in New York and London and other major cities, they commute then in from Fawn and Buncrana and places like that, get away from the smells and the dirt of the city and all that, and just commute in every day in the railways. You can't go wrong along the quay or even the water side with all the different names. Like, you call this the Strand Road. This is basically what it was, the Strand, just like the White Strand or Ballyliffin Strand. This was Derry Strand. Now it's the Strand Road. It's all built up. And over in the Bogside and that, you had Pilots Row. Pilots, what the ships need. Ships needs pilots to guide them in. Then you had nailers. You need lots of nails for ships. Nailers Row. And then down where Stanley's Walk is, it was previously called Rope Walk. What did you need for sailing ships? You needed loads and loads of rope. So you had to make ropes. We have the bend going out on the Ross's Bay and the beautiful new foil bridge. Takes away a lot of traffic. And we have the wee boat there grounded. But a modern tale that is, they were hoping to turn it into an Airbnb. And they sailed it around here. It got stuck in the sands, and it's still stuck there. So it's hard to believe, but the Honourable Irish Society, as far as I know, are still own that land and they own that river. So if you want to fish in that river, you want to do shellfish on it, you want to sail on it, you want to build on it, if you wanted to extend out there or nothing, it's all still to do. Going back to the Siege of Derry and the Honourable Irish Society. It's more a charitable venture now, and then, but it just shows you the links that there is in Derry back to London. There's a big plane up there, look at that. Once those planes came in under and jet planes took over, the shipping industry here died, immigration especially. And what's the crack? Down here then was, we had along down here then we had a load of pubs. One of them's called the Alleyman's, used to be popular with the dockers. Up here was another one, McClafferty's bar, now the Clarendon bar. I think it's shut now, but I used to sell papers on there, and it was always covered with different currencies and monies and things and that, and mementos that the sailors and all would bring. It was sort of, this is where it all happened and made Derry cosmopolitan. In fact, one of our great claims to fame, not a lot of people know it, is that the first copy of the American Declaration of Independence, right? George Washington, all them, whatever, and even it was printed by a man Dunlap from Strabane, but the first copy of it to land in Europe was, it was on board a ship, was supposed to be going to King George, I think, in England, and it had a storm, and any port in any storm, and it pulled in at Derry. So the newsletter, the newspaper in Belfast, was the first paper to publish the American Declaration of Independence. Sometimes you had murders along on here, so there was a Derry being Derry or Ireland being Ireland, a lot of it was to do with drinking. There was these strict licensing laws and all that, and there was no drinking on Sundays or whatever, but if you were on board a ship, you could drink morning and night and day if you were allowed to. And then they used to have day trips from here going up to Mayville and then back down again. And one of the reasons they were so popular was you could get a drink. So if there was nothing to do on a Sunday and you couldn't get a drink, come down, take an excursion, head up to Mayville on the boat, the pleasure boat, have a good swally, and then come back again. As you can see now, the marina is bringing sailors on. We've got tugboats, and the odd time we get cruise ships that can come up here, but most of the cruise ships will stop out at Lissahalli and get bussed on here. But there's this was like our highway. This was the highway. It brought people in here, it took people away. And it's got sad stories, it's got so many happy stories, it's got so many tragedies. It's also got tales of heroism, provided a lot of employment. And there was a lot of tears with people leaving, and there was a lot of joy when people were arriving on the boats from Scotland and elsewhere. So we couldn't cover everything. I hope we got you a few interesting stories. And as I say once again, if you want any more interesting stories, there's a wee under the link for buy us a coffee, because we don't get funded by anybody. I like my history, Gavin likes his films, and he just turns up and says, let's make a film. So I think our next one's going to be about the bridges. What do you reckon? The bridges are a good story and so on. I think that might be our next one, and I hope you enjoyed it, and once again, thank you very much for watching.